There comes a moment in every person's life when the world seems to stop listening, when your efforts are laughed at, your dreams are dismissed, and your intentions are misunderstood. I've known that silence. I've walked through rooms where every eye held doubt and every voice whispered, "He won't make it." I've stood in front of projects that once felt like destiny, only to watch them collapse under the weight of public ridicule and private defeat. And yet, here I am. Not because I've never failed, but because failure became my greatest teacher. It taught me patience when everything in me wanted to rush. It taught me resilience when giving up would have been easier. It taught me humility when success could have made me blind. Most importantly, it taught me that strength is not born from applause. It is built in the shadows, in the silence, and in the stillness of your own soul. This is not a speech about success. It is about struggle, about standing tall when everything inside you is breaking, and about believing in your purpose even when the world refuses to. Because sometimes it's the fall that prepares you for the rise. And that perhaps is where true strength begins. In the early stages of a vision that aimed to provide mobility for the common man, a bold idea was born. A car that would be affordable, accessible, and safe for Indian families. It wasn't just a product, it was a mission rooted in purpose. But the world didn't see it that way. When the prototype was unveiled, the backlash was swift. Critics called it a toy, some questioned the feasibility, others mocked the design, and many ridiculed the ambition behind it. The media, industrial circles, and even the public poured skepticism over the dream. It wasn't just criticism, it was humiliation on a national scale. Yet behind the silence of the person who carried this dream, there was no retaliation, only reflection. He chose not to counter the noise with louder noise. Instead, he went back to the drawing board, humbled but not defeated. The project had failed to receive the recognition it deserved, but the deeper failure was how the vision itself was misunderstood. Still, that didn't stop the work. Improvements were made, changes were introduced, safety was enhanced, and the dream stayed alive. The failure of the first attempt carved something stronger in the heart of the visionary. A sense of resilience not defined by success, but by persistence. What began as a failure became a case study in patience. In time, the project did launch. And even though it didn't revolutionize the market as initially hoped, it sparked a conversation across the world. People began to understand that failure doesn't always mean something is worthless. Sometimes it just means the world isn't ready yet. That's what happened. The car itself eventually became a symbol of trying when no one believes, of holding on when everyone lets go. The rejection by the market didn't crush the spirit behind the mission. If anything, it built it. It showed that taking a risk, even when it ends in failure, teaches more than playing safe ever could. The story wasn't about a car anymore. It was about the courage to dream big and stand tall when the world around you tries to shrink you. Years later, the legacy of that project wasn't measured in sales or units on the road. It was measured in how many hearts it touched, how many minds it inspired, and how it gave other dreamers permission to try and fail. Because in failure there was strength. In mockery there was resolve. In rejection there was a promise. To keep building, keep believing, and keep moving forward. The early setbacks in that venture did more than test the vision, they shaped the man behind it. There was a time when a company faced serious challenges, operating in a harsh environment where survival itself had become a question. Years of hard work had built the business into something meaningful, something that carried legacy and purpose. But financial pressures and market limitations made it vulnerable. Seeking a solution, its leadership looked toward global partnerships, hoping that someone might see the value, invest in the people behind it, and help rescue the dream. Meetings were set, presentations were made, and expectations were cautiously hopeful. But what happened next left a mark that went far deeper than any balance sheet. The delegation was received with coldness. The body language was dismissive, the tone of the conversation was patronizing, and the final response was a flat-out rejection. It wasn't just that the offer was declined. It was the way it was declined. There was no courtesy, no recognition of the effort, and no respect for the story behind the business. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it was national. It felt like dignity had been stripped at the doorstep of those who were once considered industry peers. But instead of lashing out, the response was calm. There was no press conference, no emotional statement, no dramatic fallout. There was only silence and an inner resolve that began to grow. The rejection, painful as it was, became a mirror. You reflected the need to believe in one's own strength, not depend on the validation of others. The leadership returned home, carrying with them not shame, but a quiet fire. That fire led to one of the boldest business moves in the country's history. Instead of selling, they went on to acquire. The tables turned dramatically when the very business empire that once mocked the offer was later acquired by the same hands it had rejected. That moment was not just a corporate victory. It was a lesson in patience, perseverance, and silent strength. The world watched in disbelief as a company that once sought help with folded hands now stood tall, making headlines for the courage to not only survive but to lead on a global stage. What started as humiliation turned into redemption, not because of revenge, but because of resilience. The men behind that move didn't celebrate with arrogance. He didn't retaliate with ego. He simply proved through action that strength is not shown in how loud you respond to insult, but how quietly you rise above it. The entire journey became a message to countless others who face rejection and mockery, that failure does not define the end, it defines the turning point. And sometimes being written off by others is the push you need to write your own story. The painful memory of that meeting abroad never faded, but it no longer carried the sting of failure. It became the fuel for something far greater, something that turned pain into power and rejection into respect. There is a quiet kind of strength that comes from choosing purpose over profit. In the world of business, success is often measured in quarterly results and rising share prices. But not everyone plays by those rules. Some journeys are guided by a deeper sense of responsibility towards people, towards nation, and towards a future that isn't yet visible. The man at the heart of the story consistently chose long-term vision over short-term applause. When others rushed to cut costs, outsource labor, or take shortcuts for immediate financial gain, he focused instead on building systems, nurturing talent, and standing by values that didn't always show results on paper. It wasn't always a popular path. Critics called it idealistic. Analysts questioned the choices. Shareholders demanded faster growth, quicker profits, more aggressive expansion, but he remained steady. There were times when returns were low and patience was tested, yet he didn't flinch, because for him, a business wasn't just about numbers. It was about people, whether it was protecting jobs during difficult times, launching products that made lives better instead of just margins stronger, or investing in innovation that would only bear fruit years later. He walked the difficult road with calm conviction. One particular instance stood out when a massive opportunity arose that could have meant great profit, but it came at the cost of compromising values. The deal was tempting, the pressure was immense, but the decision was firm, no compromise. That refusal baffled many in the boardroom, but it defined everything he stood for. In the aftermath, while others gained faster traction, he took the slower road, but that road led to deeper impact. Years down the line, the foundations he built through patience and principle began to show their strength. His companies were trusted not just for their products, but for their integrity. His leadership style became a model of conscience in capitalism. He didn't measure success in immediate wins, but in the legacy left behind. Even when projects failed or growth stalled, the mission never changed. It wasn't about just building wealth. It was about building something meaningful. There was a time when one of his most ambitious ventures was criticized for not generating enough revenue. The product was noble in intention, but weak in performance. People called it a financial misstep, but he never regretted it, because the intent was never just profit, it was impact. And though the numbers didn't rise, the respect did. The project didn't bring in millions, but it inspired millions. It reminded the world that leadership isn't about chasing what's easy. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. This unwavering commitment to purpose shaped a legacy that no profit chart could capture. In a world that often rewards the fast, he proved the power of the patient. And in a culture obsessed with gain, he stood for something deeper: grace, dignity, and vision. His strength was never in how much he earned, but in what he refused to sell. There are moments in life when everything you believe in is tested, not by the outside world, but by your own inner doubts. The kind of failure that truly stings is not the one that others see, but the one that shakes your core quietly when no one is watching. It is in these moments that a person either bends or builds. The man in this story experienced many such trials. He faced professional ridicule, strategic failures, personal loss, and public misunderstanding. Projects he nurtured for years sometimes collapsed under market pressure. Promises made to communities became difficult to keep when economic conditions shifted. There were times when he was blamed for things beyond his control, when headlines questioned his judgment, and when the weight of legacy sat heavily on his shoulders. In those moments, walking away would have been easier. Silence would have been safer, but something deep within refused to quit. The disappointments did not harden him, they refined him. Instead of reacting with anger, he responded with introspection. He didn't allow failure to destroy his character. Instead, he let it deepen his understanding of life and leadership. He began to see that pain had a way of revealing truths that success often hides. It showed him who was real and who was only around for the applause. It taught him the difference between confidence and arrogance. It helped him grow in humility. There was a turning point when an entire project, filled with promise and public hope, began to unravel. The financial numbers didn't add up, the market didn't respond, and criticism poured in from every side. But in the middle of that collapse, he stood steady. He visited the factories, spoke to the workers, and reminded them that failure is not shameful, it is part of building something meaningful. That posture of quiet leadership, of being present in failure, not just success, earned him a loyalty that no bonus or incentive could ever buy. The pain he endured didn't just shape his business acumen, it shaped his soul. He started to care less about the spotlight and more about the substance. Public image was never his goal, impact was. Slowly over the years, the strength that was forged in those dark seasons became the very thing that made him unshakable. While others celebrated quick wins, he focused on long-term healing. While others moved on from failures, he carried them as lessons. He never used his pain as a platform for sympathy, but as a tool for clarity. It made him kinder, more empathetic, more courageous. He began to recognize that brokenness, when accepted, becomes wisdom, and wisdom, when lived out, becomes strength. Every failure left a scar, but those scars turned into maps that guided him forward. They reminded him that success is never built in straight lines. It is carved through valleys of doubt, loss, and correction. The man who once tasted defeat found that it was in those moments of falling that he discovered how deep his roots truly were. There are people who, when faced with a storm, raise their voice to fight it. And then there are others who choose to face it with silence, not because they are weak, but because they are stronger than the storm itself. In the face of intense criticism, relentless media pressure, and waves of public doubt, the man in this story chose the latter path. There were moments when decisions he made were misunderstood, projects he championed were questioned, and the very institutions he built came under attack. News channels ran headlines that painted him as indecisive. Editorials speculated about his leadership. Some called him outdated. Others accused him of being too soft in a world that demanded aggression. Yet through all of it, he never reacted with anger. He never summoned a press conference to defend himself, nor did he attempt to silence his critics with force or money. He allowed the noise to pass, like wind through open windows. He understood that the truth doesn't always need to shout to be heard. In a world that often confuses volume with power, his calm demeanor was both misunderstood and deeply profound. One particular incident saw one of his companies being publicly questioned for its performance. Competitors took advantage. Headlines spread doubt, and some even called for his exit. But instead of lashing out, he focused inward. He gathered his team, listened more than he spoke, and worked silently on fixing what needed to be fixed. That kind of strength, staying calm when everything around you is on fire, is not taught in business schools. It comes from within, from years of discipline, reflection, and humility. He knew that reactions made in rage often become regrets, so he chose patience. And while others played politics, he worked on rebuilding trust. In time, the same people who questioned him began to notice that under his quiet leadership, the organization not only stabilized, but grew stronger. What they failed to understand earlier, they began to respect. And it wasn't because he proved them wrong, it was because he proved himself right. His calm in crisis became his signature strength. It reminded everyone that leadership isn't about dominating the room. It's about holding your ground when the room turns against you. There's a particular kind of dignity in not defending yourself when you know the work will speak louder than any speech. And as the winds passed and the noise faded, what remained was a leader who stood firm, not by shouting over others, but by standing steady within himself. The weight of legacy is not something you inherit, it is something you build, piece by piece, often through moments of quiet struggle and unseen endurance. For the man at the center of this story, success never arrived like a sudden wave of applause. It was slow, deliberate, shaped by years of setbacks, criticism, internal conflicts, and missed opportunities. But each failure, rather than breaking him, contributed to the foundation of something far greater. What others saw as defeat, he treated as education. Every misstep became a stepping stone, every rejection a redirection. This ability to extract meaning from pain and wisdom from disappointment became his greatest strength. When businesses under his leadership faltered, he didn't look for excuses. He looked inward. When a new venture failed to take off or faced ridicule, he didn't hide behind numbers. He faced the truth head on, learned from it, and tried again. That relentless cycle of trying, failing, learning, and rising defined his journey. Not grand victories, but quiet rebuilds. These weren't just personal lessons, they became part of the organizational culture. The people around him saw that mistakes weren't punished, they were understood. They saw that courage didn't mean having all the answers, but having the resolve to keep going, even when there were none. Over time, this approach created a system where innovation could grow, where risks could be taken, and where trust was not demanded, but earned. When asked about his leadership, those who worked with him rarely spoke of bold speeches or dramatic gestures. They spoke of consistency, calmness, and a strange ability to stay composed when everything seemed to be falling apart. This composure wasn't natural. It was built through years of walking through storms without letting them enter his spirit. One of the most defining moments in his story was not when he made a powerful acquisition or launched a new product, but when he stood silently after a major failure, took full responsibility, and refused to pass blame. That moment showed the world that leadership is not about standing tall in victory. It's about standing upright in defeat. And slowly a legacy began to take shape, not one of perfection, but of perseverance. His story reminded everyone watching that real strength is not loud, it is not flashy, it is quiet, patient, and persistent. The empire he built was not the result of one brilliant idea. It was the result of dozens that didn't work, and the courage to try the next one anyway. The admiration he earned didn't come from never falling. It came from the grace with which he stood back up. Every failure became a brick in the structure of trust people placed in him. And with time, the world came to see what he already knew deep within, that the strongest legacies are not those without scars, but those that wear them with dignity. So, when you look at failure, don't see it as the end of the road. See it as the ground on which true strength is built. The stumbles, the rejections, the humiliations, they are not there to define your worth, but to shape your character. Every painful chapter, every silent setback, every lonely decision made in the dark contributes to the person you are becoming. Strength is not formed in comfort. It is carved in fire. And it is only through failure that we come to understand our deepest convictions, our truest resilience, and our quietest courage. The world will often judge you by what you build, but what truly matters is what you endure and how you rise. I did not become stronger despite failure. I became stronger because of it. And if there is one truth that life has taught me, it is this: fall with grace, rise with purpose, and carry your scars not as signs of defeat, but as badges of becoming. Because in the end, failure does not break you, it reveals the unbreakable within you.